I'm walking around this dilapidated building and you might wonder, what is asbestos and where do we find it? Well, asbestos is a natural mineral. It's been mined out of the ground and we've been using it for at least 5,000 years. And it's got some amazing properties, in fairness. It makes great heat insulation. It doesn't burn. It's great for fireproofing. It's non-conductive, it's inert, it's hard wearing, it's very strong. And because of these amazing properties, we have been using it in buildings for a very, very long time. The problem is, we might accidentally disturb it during maintenance activities, which means we might inhale some of the fibers, the dust, and that can cause some really nasty diseases. Many countries around the world have banned the use of asbestos, but we still find it in older buildings and also old machines. Machines like this, whatever it is it an engine or a boiler or something? And the reason we find it in these older places is because of those wonderful thermal insulation properties that I was telling you about. So we often find it in cement wall panels, old fire blankets, sprayed insulation on beams and columns. You might find it insulating pipes. It might be in fire doors and gaskets and boilers. Talking of gaskets and boilers, take a look at this. We've got a piece of rope here. Now I can't tell just by looking at it, but I suspect that this might be a piece of asbestos sealing the door or the panel on this boiler or engine or whatever it was. And you can actually see it over here. If you turn the camera, here's the old plate where it's bolted on. And if we just notice around there how this heat-resistant seal is there to keep the heat in. Basically, asbestos can be found in lots of places. If your building was built before the year 2000, there is a very good chance that it's got asbestos in it somewhere. Both employees or contractors can be exposed to asbestos fibers if they are carrying out work which disturbs the asbestos and releases fibers into the air. It's not just contractors, it's also trespassers too, if they are daft enough, thank you, I'll take that, if they're daft enough to start smashing things up with sledgehammers. Now, asbestos is a risk when it's damaged and when it's disturbed. When that happens, it creates airborne fibers, like a dust, and the dust can then be inhaled by the person doing the job, as well as anyone else who's in the area. Now, if the dust doesn't get cleaned up, then it can lie around and get inhaled by some people later. Over time, the inhalation of asbestos can cause asbestos-related diseases such as asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma, which is just as dangerous as it's hard to spell. These are very serious diseases, often terminal, life-limiting. It's estimated that around the whole world, 10 million people will die from exposure to asbestos before we get it under control. Now, the development of these diseases can take a very long time. It can take somewhere in the region of 15 to 40 years, usually. So, if you have asbestos in your workplace, you have a moral and legal duty to make sure that your employees are not exposed. The first thing you need to do is to take reasonable steps to identify the location and condition of the asbestos in your workplace. Now, this means that you have to get a competent person to carry out a survey of the building. Now, this will usually result in what we call an asbestos register. Basically, it's a record of all of the pieces of asbestos in the building, where they are, whether they're in good condition or in bad condition. Now, please note, you cannot, or me for that matter, we can't positively identify asbestos just by looking at it. No, you have to take a sample, and then you look at the sample through a microscope. Now, that's expensive. Many organizations might choose not to spend the money doing these expensive tests. That's okay. The alternative is this. Legally speaking, if you suspect that something might be made of asbestos, then you have to act as if it really is asbestos. So, with that in mind, it might actually be worth investing in that expensive microscope analysis. Otherwise, you might end up treating lots of things in your building as asbestos when they might not actually be asbestos. If possible, it is safer to leave the asbestos where it is, provided that you have a sound plan to manage it. Managing asbestos means doing regular checks on every piece of asbestos to make sure that its condition is not getting worse. Now, if the asbestos is in bad condition, you might be able to fix it, repair it. You might be able to seal it in. Alternatively, you could box it in, maybe with some kind of plastic or metal trunking. Ideally, you want to avoid removing it. Ripping out asbestos is such a high-risk task that in the UK, legally speaking, you have to employ licensed asbestos removal contractors. Some asbestos tasks are actually quite low risk and you don't have to be licensed. For example, drilling a hole into an asbestos panel. Now, these can be done by non-licensed personnel, but they still have to be trained, they have to have a safe system of work, have all the right equipment, and wear the appropriate PPE. Now, I've actually found what looks to be asbestos in an old fuse board. Take a look at these little bits of textile. It looks like a piece of cotton or fibre or something there. When the fuses blew, they used to create big sparks, like little mini explosions, and it used to generate a lot of heat. So these pads used to absorb the heat and the explosion and protect the rest of the fuse board. Now, we're not going to touch them because that might in itself create dust. They're not in the best of condition. Maybe it will be a good idea for us to get out of here because there might be a little bit of asbestos in the air floating around. Well, that concludes our asbestos video. We've covered quite a lot. You now have an awareness of what asbestos is, where it might be found in your building. You know what diseases it causes, although you might not know how to spell them. You also know how you might disturb the asbestos fibres and endanger your staff. Most importantly, you now know what you need to do to manage asbestos in your workplace and keep your colleagues safe.